Hey, and welcome back to Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank. Okay, guys, I'd like to do a follow-up to the Gold Peddlers podcast I did yesterday, where I talked about the idea of gold and how gold has historically and consistently underperformed equities in the stock market. And yet we've had a slew of conservative talk show hosts on the right side of the aisle pushing gold for many years as sort of the answer to our political woes as America kind of falls deeper and deeper into sort of Marxist ideology. And it's interesting to me because it's kind of bothered me as a guy that believes in owning sort of physical attributes, physical sort of equities, physical tangible items in the world that's become usurious and in the world that's become really a debt system in that sense. I think owning tangible items is very important. And yet the system we live in has made that virtually impossible, right? As most people don't own anything anymore, as we're kind of lent all this money throughout the course of our life in order that we can govern our lives, whether it's buying our home, whether it's our medical care, whether it's our education, or the food we put on our table. In that respect, we've all been shuffled into this usury system that in many ways is unjust, right? Particularly as it's sent more and more people to work, especially women to work. I think there's been a fundamental problem there, and we've devalued many of the traditional roles that once were so vital. And as a result of that, we've seen really the collapse of culture, the collapse of family, the collapse of faith, and really the political system has become objectively corrupt. But for my part, I've always had problems with the peddling of gold, because the peddling of gold really demands a doom and gloom scenario. And when you have right-wing talk show hosts that are painting sort of a bleak future from a political perspective and then collecting royalties off selling you doom and gloom, hey, go buy gold, the world's about to fall apart, because gold is a hedge against sort of, when equities begin to fall. There's a little bit of an ethical problem there. And I touched on it a little bit in yesterday's podcast, so let's call this a part 2. The first thing I want to do is go through simply proving my point, a historical narrative here. And I'll put this chart up in the description of this show. But just so I make my point clear here, I'm not a guy that's anti-gold. I'm a guy that believes that just what history teaches us, and that is that equities have historically outperformed gold. And as doom and gloomers, especially on talk radio, have sold gold while collecting royalty checks, I believe they've misled people financially. And as a result, they have cost people, most likely, sort of a brighter future financially speaking. When you look at the chart, the 100-year chart in America, you see that gold has returned roughly 10,000% going back. I believe this chart goes all the way back to the year, let me see here, 1915. And as we move all the way up to 2015, there's about a roughly, just under actually, a 10,000% return on gold. You compare that to the Dow Jones Industrial Average all the way up until 2015, and not only is it much more than just under 10,000%, but you see the Dow Jones average has returned historically 60,000% plus, over 60,000%. Now, that is a big difference in regards to return on your dollars there. Now, it's not to say that gold doesn't have its place in your portfolio. Certainly it does, especially if you believe political turmoil or wars or natural disasters or whatever may throw off your economy or the balance of the economy in that sense, right? Gold most likely has its place if you feel so. The problem I have here is that you take simply the past, let's call it 30 years, that conservative talk radio has dominated sort of that segment of the media, preaching the buying of gold because of this onslaught of a socialist government that has come in and taken over America, using the political narrative that socialism sort of gobbles up private industry. It sort of uses its overbearing federal government powers to suppress business, and thus that naturally means less economic activity and less profits, leading to an economy in turmoil at some point. And this is how they have sold gold for the past 25, 30 years, because they've used the political narrative in America going to the far left as that basis for them to determine that this economy in the future, capitalism, the free markets, it's all being threatened by the power base, by the left-wing power base in America. And yet in that time span, in that 30-year time span, we've seen gold really flatten out. It had a nice little peak right where we had the 2008 crash of the markets, right? But ever since that crash started about 2010, 2011, it's flattened out. I believe it was at about $1,800 an ounce in 2011, 2021. Now it's right around 1900. It's barely even budged. It's flatlined for the most part. And yet equities, as I pointed out here, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is up over 60,000% over that 100-year period versus just under 10,000 for gold. And that doesn't include the NASDAQ, which I would imagine is much higher than the 60,000%, which is the tech sector, right? So clearly, from a historical perspective and narrative, the stock equities have outperformed gold. But you take that 30-year period that the likes of Beck and Limbaugh and all these other guys. Now, I don't remember if Limbaugh ever pushed gold. He may have. I don't remember. I pick on Beck because he's the most obvious, right? But let's say Beck has been on the air for 25 years. We need to really discuss here if he's been pushing gold for 25 years. And I know he's been pushing at least for 10, 15. I can tell you that much right now when I was listening to him much more often. But let's call it 25 years. If he's scaring his listeners into buying gold, an investment that's had a minimal amount of return over time, and people have fled equities in favor of gold while he's collecting a royalty check to push gold for his own benefit, how much money has he cost his listeners? How much of a future, how much of a retirement, right? Because we do live in a user system, right? And whether we like it or not, we're most likely, almost all of us are managing debt. And at the end of our lives, whether it's in our retirement or in our 50s or 60s, whatever it may be, we're going to need to create that wealth. We're going to need to create money in order to manage our lives, right? Listen, you may not like the usury system. I don't like the usury system, but it is what it is. If somebody can show me how to govern our lives outside the usury system, because if you're asking me that I got to go live out in the cardboard box somewhere on the public street, I'm sorry. That ain't going to happen. We're all doing the best we can in a system we were all born into. We're all born into this debt system, and it's something we have to manage. And that's why I say what the likes of Beck are doing is a crime against a lot of people by using political ideologies and fear tactics to sell a product to his audience. Now you say, well, his audience should be smarter than that. They should catch on and they shouldn't fall. And you're right. You're absolutely right. But you know what? I learned in life, that some people are just, they are who they are, right? They're very trustworthy. You meet a charismatic personality, whether it's in life or whether it's on the internet or whether it's talk radio, you begin to trust these people. In many ways, they become part of your family in some capacity, right? You warm up to them. Listen, for all my critiques of Limbaugh toward the end, as I ventured into the integralist camp, I listened to him for 15 years. I like Rush. I think he's a decent guy. I think his ideas were wrong as I began to see the world a little differently. But I think Rush was a good guy. He was a decent human being with lots of flawed ideas, with lots of public sin that I wasn't a fan of. But in that respect, I like the guy. I just wish, and I hope somebody before the end of his life got to him, right? But here's my point. Is that we're all born into this usury system, and we're all doing what we can to micromanage our finances to get to the end of life, to get to old age, or to get to the next world. Do what we can to properly feed our families. But when you have right-wing talk shows that are really manipulating power and their influence on talk radio in order to push gold, to push something that inherently calls for a doomsday scenario. Because like I said in that last cast, if you're pushing gold, then you're essentially rooting for the economy to collapse. And that has greater implications for most people, right? Now, I may agree that we have these great political problems, great economic and financial problems on the horizon. War is always potential. Natural disasters are always a potential. The collapse of the culture, the collapse of society, civil unrest, it's all there. I see the signs too. But that doesn't mean that we all have to give financial advice to anybody, especially when we're getting a royalty for it. Like, I can accept the discussion that when we look at what's happened in the greater sphere of politics and culture and society, that an impending collapse is coming. I can agree with you, right? As an honest discussion and a discourse. But if I were to come to you and tell you the collapse is coming, buy gold, buy it now, and don't invest in anything else because the collapse is coming while somebody's giving me a paycheck, I'm sorry. I believe that's unethical. There's a problem there. And think of the 25-year period that Beck has pushed gold on his audience. Now, remember what the old saying is in the stock market, in equities. It's not timing the market, it's time in the market. The greatest advantage you have when investing in good companies in the stock market is time. Because through the factor of compounding interest is how wealth is accumulated. You need time. And if Beck, over the past 25, 30 years, has misled his audience and scared them out of equities and into gold, that is time that has been lost. And time is the one thing in this world, as human beings, as flesh and blood, we can't get back. Once time is gone, it's lost forever. And Beck, in my opinion, could have. I can't judge. I don't know all his audience. This is, again, a generalization, a general theory that I have. But Beck could have influenced many of his audience to lose all that precious time using fear tactics while he's collecting a royalty check from Goldline, right? Which is the company he pushes and has been pushing for a long time. So, and just so we're clear here that I'm not making this up, I got a little clip here. It's about 2 minutes long. This is how Beck approaches the issue of selling gold. Here you go. Here it is here.
If you don't mind, I'd like to just take a couple of seconds out of your busy day just to talk to you about something. I'm in my offices here in Dallas, Texas, at the Mercury Studios, and I just wanted to thank you for being a part of something that's been very special in my life. We are celebrating the 10th anniversary of my partnership with Goldline, and they are the only company that I trust, the only company that I would buy gold from, and certainly the only company that I would endorse for gold. The world is such a confusing place right now. It is good things, bad things, all at once. Everything is so big, so urgent. We're not really paying attention to what's happening in North Korea, and that could be insanity overnight. ISIS is using Mad Max-like tactics. There's unrest all around the world. I don't know what's going to happen, but boy, the starfield is sure moving in the other direction from safety and security. And I have just looked at my portfolio here recently and looked again at my holdings in gold and upped my standing with gold. It's something physical that you can hold in your hand. Geez, with the cashless banking stuff that they're doing now in Australia, I can't believe. I remember being a kid and, the nun talking about the book of Revelations, and I'm in grade school, and she's talking about everybody's going to buy stuff with numbers and no money. We're in the cashless society. It's coming. And not because of anything bad, just because that's the way people are moving. And in Australia and India, they're already doing it. It's bizarre. The great thing is the peace of mind that comes with gold. And I just wanted to wish happy anniversary to Goldline and to thank them for our long partnership. And here's to the next 10 years being even better.
Yeah. Here's to the next 10 years of Glenn Beck collecting even more royalties from Goldline. I mean, listen to that commercial. He talked about potential financial collapse. He put the fear of a cashless society. He put the fear of terrorism. He just lined them all up. And he talked about his own portfolio, how he's adding more because he's not sure because of all the craziness. These are all sort of the political paradigms and how he sees the world in order to push gold while collecting a royalty check. Now, listen. Certainly, Beck could be right because we all see something wrong with our culture. It's something we've talked about here, frankly speaking, and at the Knights of Christian for a long time. Civilization is off course, morally, ethically, politically, and we all sense something coming down the pipe. But this commercial I just played here, this infomercial here, it was done in March of 2017. It was posted on YouTube on March of 2017. That's over 4 years ago. Imagine the person or two or 10 or 1,000, how many people watch this and heeded his advice of fear tactics. They've lost 4.5 years of time in the market. And in that time, the stock market over the past 4.5 years is returning 15.5%, while gold has been stagnant. You get that? So if you're aiming for retirement and you have a certain level of income and you have a certain mortgage payment or outstanding medical bills or whatever it may be, and you need to get to a certain income level by the time you get to retirement, back in that past 4.5 years has really altered the course of those people that were heeding his call and his bad advice, right? Now imagine the person that started listening to that message 20 years ago, 25 years ago, or even 30 years ago. How much wealth and capacity for his own audience to eventually take care of their financial needs. Again, it's a usury system whether we like it or not. If you don't get to retirement with a certain amount of equities, you're not going to be able to manage your debt long term. That's just a fact of the American system, whether we like it or not. We all have massive mortgages. We all have massive car payments. We all have medical bills, right? Now, I know somebody will say, well, you don't need cars. You could ride your bike or you could ride your horse. Okay, get real. Get real. Okay? We don't live in a society where horses are accommodated anymore. I'm sorry. Okay, there has to be a certain sense of reality here. But this is the damage that Beck has done, in my opinion, by preaching gold. Now, that doesn't mean in the long term, he won't be right at some point. I'm not suggesting that. But this is the problem when you're collecting a royalty check, because he doesn't know. He's speculating based upon his political opinion and how he judges world events. The fact is, if Beck started preaching this message 30 years ago, and people heeded his call 30 years ago, you've lost 30 years in the market, a market that has made lots of gains and lots of returns, potentially costing his audience tens, possibly hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, right? And depending where you live, that can matter. Some will say, well, Frank, isn't millions of dollars excessive? Well, it depends where you live. Depends where you live. You live in Los Angeles, Boston, New York, $1 million is relative over there. $2 million is relative over there, right? Because you're going to need that just to manage your house payment, your property taxes, and your medical bills. Because that's the kind of world we live in now, right? Buying a home nowadays, it's not a game anymore. It's not fun anymore. You got to get to a certain age with a certain level of money in order to manage the usury system. People think because somebody may have $1 million in your 401k that, oh, they're rich. They're just taking everything for granted. No, it depends where you're at in your life. Because this is a cruel world. It's a cruel financial system that will crush you if you're not prepared to deal with the nuances of life. Take the person that has long-term healthcare issues, like I do. I'm going to need to figure out a way to pay for those things long-term. What if you got off to a late start in buying a house in life and you bought it in your 40s? You know you're never going to pay this house off. You're going to have a perpetual mortgage over your head the rest of your life. There are so many nuances in this system, and it's precisely because we don't own anything, and it's designed that way. And we got institutions like BlackRock that are pushing prices up because they're borrowing money at a cheap rate, and they figure that they can buy homes and then rent out square blocks at premium prices, premium rent prices. That is, guess what? Guess what? All that needs to be factored in. Call it a user system. Say it's evil. Say it's satanic. Say what you want. But it's the system we're born in. And Beck, squashing the wealth of many people, possibly squashing the wealth of many people later on in life because he's getting a royalty check by pushing a doom and gloom end of world scenario, I think is highly unethical and highly problematic. So I want to do a follow-up on this because this is important. I don't think people realize this, right? And I know we've had the libertarians like the Ron Pauls and guys like that pushing gold. I'm just not sure Ron Paul's ever got paid for that. I don't mind an honest conversation about the state of the world, the state of the economy, what's coming down the pipe, if this whole thing can collapse. That's fine. I think that's a legitimate discussion. And even Glenn Beck bringing these up on his show, that he sees problems down the line, it's a legitimate discussion. But when you're collecting royalties off of this, that's problematic. And on top of it all, he's been wrong. He's been dead wrong up until this point, costing his audience potentially the future of managing their finances properly and just to have a life of dignity in America. This is Frank signing off for Frankly Speaking. Good night, everybody.